Previously on Soothing Sounds podcast.
The point for me was to recognize the power of the human mind, but also how our mental capacity is connected to His plan. If there's one text that really stood out for me, that is, hold lightly onto things of this world. Too many individuals out there that is not grasping onto the nature of the Creator. In other words, there are so many people out there that is angry at God. But the reality of the matter is, He doesn't need to prove Himself. The reality is, He doesn't need to conquer anything. Everything could have just been about Himself. But yet He decided to create all of us so that we can one day leave this world, leave the flesh, and to be with Him, to unite with Him, to become one with Him, so that we can live in peace. Welcome to another episode of Soothing Sounds podcast. This is Cameron. In this episode, I will be discussing the difference between worldly peace, but also godly peace, based on the burning sensation. Now, before I get to anything else, as mentioned before, with this podcast, this is not me providing any form of counseling. This is not me giving you advice. This is just me sharing with you my story. Now, getting to the topic of conversation. Peace, inner peace, but more specifically the difference between experiencing worldly peace but also experiencing godly peace. You know, what's the difference between the two? Now, back in 2018, that was a point in my life where I was still a very dysfunctional person. I was overly dependent on striving for happiness, overly dependent on striving for contentment, without me even realizing, how much I'm losing along the way by entirely living life from the inside out. Now, remember this one night, I'll never forget this evening. I remember I was sitting on the bed. That was back in 2018. I remember I was sitting on the bed, and that was a point where I was mentally congested. I was mentally cluttered, so to speak. Now, that was the point where I knew that I just had to surrender myself. I had to put my personal desires to the side. And that was the point where I had to go to the Creator and ask for direction. Hence, show me the way and I will listen. Now, that was the point as I was asking for guidance, as I was asking for direction. That was also the point where everything fell apart. Everything had to fall apart in order to make space for the burning sensation to initiate, in order for the burning sensation to take place. But then also, as I was going through the burning sensation, finally getting to the point where I had the ability to now adapt to the burning sensation, that was when the real test, the actual test, took place. That was the point where I was put to the test in order for me to recognize the meaning behind, the value behind Romans 8:6. For to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the spirit is life and peace. Now, as I've mentioned before, as I was asking for guidance, as I was asking for direction, everything else fell apart mentally, but then also the physical part. I found myself in this position of being unemployed. And because I was unemployed, I had a vehicle, I had to let it go. I had an apartment, I had to let it go. For 7 years, I've been out of the house, but I had to move back home because I didn't have no other choice. Now, because I was in this position of being unemployed, obviously trying to get back onto the field, but you get to that point where you've been out of the system for quite some time, where you start to feel like a spectator. You start to simply observe how everyone else is moving forward. Meanwhile, here you are sitting on the bench, feeling like a substitute, so to speak. And as I am convincing the coach to put me back onto the field, there is nothing but rejection coming my way. And one way or another, I find myself back to the bench. And that was the point where I started smoking. I'm not a smoker, but I started smoking. That was also the point where I started to consume excessive amounts of alcohol. I'm not a drinker, but I started drinking. But then also during that time to be somehow always surrounded by people that intentionally would waste your time, intentionally would waste your life. I had nothing on my plate. I was broke. It was constant delays on everything. And that was also the point where I started to develop health problems. I was overweight. I was this close to having a heart attack. I was this close to having a stroke. I was this close to becoming a diabetic. But then also along the way having suicidal thoughts. But then also being in that position of having nothing on your plate, working towards something. There was something specifically that I have been praying for, and actually getting to that point where that prayer came to fruition. With me thinking that finally I am out of this hole of delays, this hole of disappointments. But funny enough, and yet again finding myself back to the bench, even though it was something that I prayed for years. Now, with all of that being said, would you believe me, as I was going through all those processes throughout the years, not once did I ever experience a mental difficulty. Not once did I ever experience an bothered soul. Regardless of what I was exposed to, my soul remained unbothered. I was always at peace. I am sitting here today because of that peace. And this is a kind of peace the world could never provide me with. My peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give you.